So our first decent speaker for today is John Anderson from Australia. John served as Deputy Prime Minister of Australia for 6 years between 1999 and 2005 under John Howard. He was made an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2011 and a Companion in 2022. And if you haven't caught up with him, you need to go to his conversations on YouTube and podcast series where he interviews various thought leaders from around the world. I invited him because he's one of the few politicians that I know who's willing to champion social conservative values. So would you give a warm Kiwi welcome to John Anderson?
Nothing more ex than an ex. I'm an ex-politician, Bob. But look, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Mr. High Commissioner from Hungary, here somewhere. Friends, it's a great honour to be with you in this beautiful, beautiful country of yours. I appreciate it very much indeed. Bob, your overview this morning was fantastic. And how hard-hitting was that? We are undergoing a revolution, are we not? And I want to talk to you this morning about 3 revolutions which I think can help us form a helicopter view of how we've got to where we are and what is going wrong. Because we do need to understand the battlefield. Bob made that point. And your research is incredibly valuable. Keep it up. Knowledge is important. But how do we understand in broad terms how we got to, so that we can interact with others in the marketplace of ideas in a way that's meaningful and relevant to them? And I would put it to you, with apologies to my very good friend Os Guinness of the brewing family, a Christian apologist, a remarkable man who lives in Washington. He's written 35-odd books. I recommend one in particular to you on this subject called The Magna Carta of Humanity. And the introduction in chapter 7 in particular pad out the ideas that I just want to put to you this morning because I think they do help us understand. 3 revolutions. One which produced the freedoms that we like to take for granted in the West. One which has produced misery and oppression and cruelty and death in unbelievable proportions. And the 3rd revolution, which is in effect what Bob was telling us about this morning, the one which, if you like, has been developed in the countries that have benefited from the 1st revolution, is now backed by the people who live under the 2nd revolution. What am I talking about? Well, what is a revolution? A revolution is when that which was on top is pushed to the bottom, and that which was on the bottom rises to the fore. A complete inversion of an order. Does that make sense? That's what a revolution is. Well, we have been, particularly I would say to you, in the Five Eyes countries, Britain, America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the beneficiaries of the 1st revolution, which Os Guinness would call the Sinai Revolution. And interestingly enough, Jordan Peterson's been talking about this quite eloquently. The ideas of democracy that in many ways come from the book of Exodus. Let my people go. And then on the basis that the people matter, because they're made in the image of God, they have dignity, He cares about them, they develop a covenant, a covenantal system of government, so much better than a contractual or a power-based set of relationships. I will bring to the table, you will bring to the table, we will work with each other, we will honour our God. God will be with us while ever we honour Him. Contractual and legal obligations cast aside in favour of a better way based on cooperation and, dare I say it, true love, real understanding, real commitment to each other. And in a sense, in our culture, that revolutionary approach was to start to find its focus in the Magna Carta. Runnymede, so many years ago, still celebrated. You can go there in England, it's not far from London, up near Windsor, where the Magna Carta was signed. And at its heart was this idea of the sanctity and the worth of every individual, and that kings and others could not lord it over little people, in inverted commas. It slowly built through the failed English Revolution, but the successful American Revolution in particular, and that produced freedom as we hammered out what it meant to respect the worth and dignity of all. The democratic ideal that, as one American described as being, we're so good we had to give ourselves the vote, we're so bad we had to give ourselves a vote. It developed up the idea of freedom, which Isaiah Berlin described as negative freedom and positive freedom. Negative freedom is freedom from feudal overlords, from a police state, from being woken at 2 o'clock in the morning with a thump on the door and dragged off to the salt mines, but it's also freedom from anxiety and depression and the diseases of the new culture that Bob has so adequately, so well outlined today. Those are, if you like, freedom from the negative freedom is freedom from oppression and from loss of freedom, if you like, in a personal sense, personal enslavement. Positive freedom is the freedom to do what you ought, to reach your potential, in a Christian sense, by pouring out your heart in service to God and your fellow man. These ideas have been largely lost, I have to say. There's a really important aspect to note in this. If I were to say to you that in terms of their sort of expression in the market square, I would talk to you of the 4 freedoms that belong to us, not to governments. This is really important to understand. And those 4 freedoms are freedom of conscience and belief, freedom of religion, if you like, the right to explore, to ask the big questions. Who am I? Do I have significance? How will I interact with God and with the people around me? Freedom of conscience and belief. Freedom of speech, the freedom by which you defend all your other freedoms. Freedom of assembly, the right to meet with people of like mind, and the right, frankly, to not meet with people of like mind. In Australia today, there are all sorts of attempts to restrict your right to associate with those of like-mindedness, but it's a fundamental freedom. And fourthly, private property. John Fortescue was an English thinker from the 14th century who started to expand the Western model, if you like, of thinking around property rights. It lies at the heart of our prosperity. It's not hard to understand why. It's referred to twice in the Ten Commandments. The idea that your home is a place where you can be yourself and nobody else can take it away from you. That if you produce 2 cabbages, the state won't come and take 1 or 1.5 and leave you and your family starving. Rather, you'll have the opportunity to trade that unwanted second cabbage and profit by that action, while somebody who purchases it from you profits from it as well. Both benefit, and that lies at the heart of the building of prosperity that has lifted countless millions of people out of short, brutish lives. The 4 freedoms as we've evolved them. So that is the Sinai Revolution, in a sense, more broadly understood. And it's really important to understand that when we think of democracy, we probably often think of Lincoln in America making the point that democracy is government of the people, by the people, for the people. You've all heard that? He was quoting a clergyman that he'd heard in church just a couple of weeks before. And the clergyman was quoting John Wycliffe, the Oxford theologian, who was saying that Christians should be people who understand self-governance, how to lead good and decent lives, to be good citizens, so that they neither want nor will tolerate big intrusive governments telling them what their rights are. It's the other way around. Government in a democracy is downstream of culture, not upstream. Those freedoms are ours, and government's role is actually to recognise that and to protect them against their own instincts to want to include and increase their power and influence over citizens. Our model needs to be totally different to the one that is emerging, where we go to government saying, protect us, secure our freedoms for us, It's in your gift. No, it should be the other way around. But in an age of godlessness, as Douglas Wilson pointed out in a conversation I did with him recently, when there's no government over God, government becomes God. The second revolution might be described as the French Revolution and its children. The French Revolution sounded noble. Men everywhere are born free but are in chains. You will be free, but they weren't. 10 short, bloody and horrible years, and thankfully it was over, although the Napoleonic era was hardly more attractive. But it gave rise to great admiration in the mind of one Karl Marx. And you know what his revolutions have visited upon the world? The countless tens of millions who have died in Russia and in China and in Pol Pot's regime. The two could not be starker. One has given rise to genuine freedom and the opportunity for human flourishing. The other to oppression, to distrust, to hardship, and to massive loss of life. But then the third revolution is the one that in a way was so eloquently set out this morning by Bob. It's cultural Marxism. And we need to understand what has happened. We shouldn't be shy of the term cultural Marxism. They use it themselves. The Frankfurt School in 1923, a meeting in Germany, called to discuss why the rest of Europe, and particularly Germany, which was seen as the most likely place for a communist revolution, was not seeing the working classes rise up and create a communist nirvana of the sort that Russia was then seen to be so enjoying and benefiting from. It wasn't really a rising of the working classes, as was supposed to be the case in pure Marxist theory. Nonetheless, there was a desire to work out why Germany and the rest of Europe and the rest of the democratic world were not giving way to this obviously superior way of living, of organising themselves. And it was recognised that there was a need to recast Marxism so that it was brought about not so much necessarily by the working classes, but because it was a naturally better order, and what was stopping people from embracing it were the institutions that the democracies had built up. The institutions of freedom, if you like, family, democracy, the courts, the judiciary, education. And what began and wasn't known until the late 60s, until the term was phrased, but the long march through the institutions began. And it was designed to weaken the pillars of democracy, of freedom, that so allowed, for all of its failings, it's never been perfect, for human flourishing, because I believe that the Western democracies have provided the best environment that we have yet devised for human flourishing. And now that revolution has been successful to an extraordinary degree. Think cultural Marxism, you might call it neo-Marxism, you might call it politically correct, you might call it identity politics, you might call it critical theory, you might call it simply wokery. Woke, by the way, is an African-American term, which means that you are awakened when you understand that the world's fundamental problem is white racism, white supremacy. Martin Luther King would roll in his grave. He wanted to abolish those symbols of skin colour and so forth as forms of division. As Bob said this morning, I have a dream. I dream of the day when my children are judged on the content of their character, not the colour of their skin. But now, original sin is based on the idea of white supremacy, of white racism. Critical race theory is best known for, if you like, or critical theory, for critical race theory, which I've just outlined, but it's also critical gender theory and critical queer theory. And this stuff is extraordinary. You would never have thought it would have taken off in our universities, but it has. One of the institutions, if you like, that the march through the left has so successfully, completely inverted. And out of our universities come our school teachers and the people who go into drama and into the media. And the revolution has reached far and wide. As Bob so effectively illustrated this morning, that which was on top is now at the bottom, and that which was at the bottom is now at the top. The revolution has come a very long way. Trust in our institutions has rapidly collapsed. In Australia, the Australian National University has been tracking confidence in federal government since the 1970s. It is extraordinary. It is a graph that essentially just simply goes like that. It falls off the chart. There used to be big blips when there was a change in government. There was a wonderful government elected in Australia in 1996 and confidence went through the roof. And over time it dissipated away. Then there was the Rudd election in 2007 when my side was removed and confidence went to even higher levels, but that time it collapsed almost overnight and now there's not even a blip at election times. We're so cynical, so distrustful. We're losing trust in one another. We're losing trust, which is precisely what the cultural Marxists wanted, in the institutions of freedom. Worse than that, we have lost trust in the underlying beliefs and values that gave rise to the institutions of freedom. So this is extremely serious and threatening stuff. You are right to be deeply concerned. You are right to seek to inform yourselves of the dangers. You are right to recognise that one of the most appalling aspects of this is the extraordinary selfishness that it embodies, the narcissism, if you like, that allows us to treat our children or to create in them or to make them the victims of our culture wars. And in terms of the video podcast that I do, can I point you to one that I did with Katie Faust and Stacey Manning? They wrote a book called Them Before Us. And they might summarise it by saying, when we here today talk of the modern family, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's all about what suits adults, not about what children need. And I find it astounding that in a first world country, the powers that be can seriously argue that it is not in the interest of the community to advocate the best possible ideals environment for the raising of our children, because the economic and social costs of destroying the ideal environment in which children grow up are immense, and they literally threaten the future of your country and mine and other Western nations alike. There's an old saying that children are our future, and we are destroying our future in two ways. We are not replacing ourselves. We haven't worked it out yet, but there's a depopulation bomb about to hit something like 90-odd countries in the world, led, amazingly, by China, where it's believed the population may decline from its current 1.3 or 4 billion down to 4 or 5, 600 million by the end of this century. That is some demographic collapse. But even in countries like Australia, the birth rate's fallen to way below replacement rate. It's dropped off even more during COVID. It's not recovered. And now it's said, for example, that in France, in 50 years' time, they'll be reliant on guest workers because they'll have no young people of their own to do the jobs that need to be done in a successful economy to look after all of the old people who are on benefits and well and truly past working age. These are extraordinary realities. So you've got the depopulation bomb, but then you've got, and again, I mean, Bob has outlined it for you, the extraordinary social impact on our young people. And I was at a function with John Stenholt recently in Brisbane, and I talked about our young people, and a lady came up to me afterwards and said, I don't know why you're worried about our young people, they're doing very well. And my jaw dropped, and I said, Madam, haven't you been paying attention? The research is astonishing. The level of anxiety, of depression, of medication, of self-harm, of trauma amongst young people in the West it's an absolute indictment. It ought to have every one of us as one or two of those people that Bob referred to, even from the other side of the political divide, saying, what are we doing to our children? This is mind-boggling, and it exposes the fatal flaw at the heart of the new religion, because it says the greatest virtue is self-autonomy. Look internally, find yourself. You are who you feel you are. Forget reason, forget logic, forget science. It's all about feeling. As Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the wife of Neil Ferguson, the world's leading or most prominent economic historian, has pointed out, we are in danger of turning our democracies into emocracies, where instead of thinking things through, looking for data, responding to research, we emote. We are who we feel we are. So the greatest virtue now is self-autonomy, the radical idea that I am who I feel I am. And people and activists who follow that line are instinctively, it seems to me, anti-community, including anti-family, with all of its resulting devastation. They are anarchist, therefore anti-government. They are anti-religion because they don't believe that a higher being has any authority to show us a better way to live. The results, their monument is all around us in a culture that has lost its way and whose young are growing up believing that they are inheriting a nightmarish culture not worth defending. These are truly dangerous times. 3 final points as I close for you to consider. Knowledge is important. What Family First does for you in terms of research, hard-nosed assessment, collection and assessment of data is invaluable. You need to know what's happening so that you can relate to those around you. Secondly, it's important for us to learn how to gently ask questions. There's not much point these days sitting at the dinner table and espousing your views because it just fires people up. Have you noticed that? The age of tolerance is gone. We were told we needed to tolerate everything, be kind to everyone. Those days have gone. There's a new absolutism. If you dare to disagree with me, you are a bad person, and I will silence you. It's very hard for them to silence questions. And you'll find that many people's current worldview falls apart very quickly when you ask a few polite questions. Is that what you think? Why do you think that? Where did you get that idea from? Have you considered the alternatives? What are the outcomes? How's it going for you? Because it's not going very well. And the third point I want to make is that we must not fall into the trap of behaving as they do now. They ooze hatred of anyone who disagrees. We must not be like that. We must be motivated by love and concern for our fellow citizens. In the end, can I say to you, I am a Christian believer, our responsibility is to be true to God and leave the results to Him. We do not need to point score or behave as our opponents do. They really do display hatred and a great desire to put down, to destroy, to cleave. We should seek to build up, to love, to display genuine compassion and a real empathy for others. Finally, let me end with the shortest speech day address ever given. It was Winston Churchill when he was, shortly after the war, asked to speak at a prominent English school. The school principal had spoken for too long, cutting Churchill's time, so he simply stood up. Shortest farewell address at a school ever given, as I understand it. Just 9 words. Never give up. Never give up. Never give up. Thank you very much.